the West Bank has been incorporated into Israel. And so I would argue, in fact, that there is no more two states or a possibility of two states. In fact, Israel has already made this one state. There's only one authority, one government, one army, one water system, one currency throughout the entire country. And we'll come back to the implications of that. So what Israel's trying to do, and here's where house demolitions comes into play, is trying to displace the Palestinians, to shove them into areas A and B, or force them out of the country completely. So I want to, and one more thing I'll just mention here, in case you still haven't gotten it, in case you still think the two-state solution is floating out there somewhere, Israel built a wall. You want something a little more concrete? Here's concrete for you. We have a wall twice as high as the Berlin Wall was. It's 8 meters high, and 5 times longer than the Berlin Wall, that imprisons the Palestinians. You can see the wall is called the separation barrier because it separates Israelis from Palestinians. Separation in Hebrew is the same word as apartheid. So we use that term, we simply say it in Hebrew instead of in Afrikaans. But when it hits a settlement block, that's what these pinkish areas are. The main big settlement areas. I mean, Ma'ale Adumim here is 50,000 people. The word settlement kind of minimizes. It's obviously a land grab. So this is what Israel calls its demographic border, separating Israelis on one side from Palestinians on the other side, taking their land and then imprisoning them within the cantons. Now, in all of this, house demolitions plays a role because it's the way Israel moves Palestinians out of the West Bank. And just let me tell you a story about a family to sort of illustrate this. This will, I think, you'll see how the occupation operates and what happens to Palestinians. This is the Shawamri family. In fact, Salim was with me here on Vancouver Island 15 years ago. We took the ferry, and Salim did a tour with me in Canada. 15 years ago, his home had been demolished twice. Now we're up to 6 demolitions of his home. It's been demolished and rebuilt by us and demolished again. Salim, his wife Arabia, and their 7 kids live in a little town called Anata, next to Jerusalem in the West Bank. They bought a small plot of land. They're children of refugees, and they applied to the Israeli authorities for a building permit. And Israel said no. Israel's policy is not to allow Palestinians to build new homes for the last 47 years of occupation. In other words, it's frozen Palestinian building in 1967. Now you have children, you have grandchildren, they have to live somewhere, and that's the idea. You want to go live somewhere, you either leave the country. 400,000 Palestinians have left the country since in the last 15 years or so. The vast majority of them being middle-class people, which tremendously weakens the Palestinian society, or they get shoved into areas A and B. That's the idea. That's where you should go if you want to stay in the country. So they applied for a permit 3 times. Each time it cost them $5,000 to apply. They know they're not going to get it. It's like a lottery, though. You have a lottery here. The bad news is you're not going to win. Sorry. But nevertheless, people put millions into the lottery for that infinitesimal chance of winning. It's the same is true here. If nobody got a building permit, nobody would play the game. So of the 2.5 million Palestinians on the West Bank, Israel granted 18 building permits last year. So it's at the level of a lottery. But it's enough to suck you in. You hope you'll be one of the 18. It's the same logic. So, like thousands of other Palestinian families, Salim and Arabia were forced to build a home for themselves without a building permit. And immediately they got a demolition order from the Israeli authorities. Palestinians kind of do a simple calculation. They say there's so many thousands, tens of thousands of demolition orders outstanding, maybe I'll get lost in the shuffle. Maybe they won't notice that I built. Maybe, you know what, there's so many houses before, maybe I'll be in my house 2, 3, 5 years before they come. Maybe I'll win the lottery and they'll never come. So you build, you're living in your home, not securely, every day, because you never know when they're going to come. You know you have the demolition order. They can come any day, any night, any morning, any time. So you're not exactly living in your home securely. And in fact, the family lived in their home for 5 years. One day in the middle of the summer, July 1998, they're having lunch and there's a knock on the door. Now, I don't know what civil servants look like on Vancouver Island, but this is what they look like if you're a Palestinian. This is Rami, and this is Micha, both officials of what Israel calls, and language becomes important, what Israel calls its civil administration. Because Israel wants to present this as if there's no occupation. This is normal, proper, routine administration. And so it's a civil administration. So these are civilians, kind of, accompanied by dozens of soldiers. There's a knock on the door. Salim answers the door. Rami says to him, "Is this your house?" Salim says, "Yes, it's my house." He says, "No, it isn't. It's our house now. You got 15 minutes to get all your belongings out. We're going to demolish it." So what would you do? You're not a terrorist. It's nothing to do with security. You're not a criminal. You're a normal person who's living in your home. And it's your home. We know how sacred and intimate the spaces of our home, of our families, of our personal lives. You wouldn't just say, okay, fine, and start taking, and you wouldn't even know in 15 minutes what to take out first. Where would you start? And of course, the whole idea that someone's coming to demolish your home is unacceptable, and you would probably yell, or I don't know what you would do. And when that happens, it turns into resistance. The soldiers are not there for decoration, and Salim was beaten and thrown out of his house. In all the commotion around, Arabia managed to slam the door shut of the house. They were outside, everybody. Slam the door shut and lock it with her and the kids inside. And that's when she called us, and she called whoever she could think of. So the soldiers broke the windows of the house and threw in tear gas canisters to flush out the family. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a whiff of tear gas outside. It's pretty powerful stuff. Inside your home with your kids, you can imagine how overpowering it is. Then they broke in the door. Arabia was carried out unconscious. The kids running and screaming in every direction. You can imagine the trauma that this family is going through.
That's what each family member.
Now, multiply this 48,000 times. Israel's demolished 48,000 Palestinian homes in the occupied territory since 1967. Multiply this violent, traumatic, humiliating experience 48,000 times, and you begin to get a sense of what's going on. This last summer, in the assault on Gaza, in July and August, Israel demolished 18,000 Palestinian homes just in July and August, and they haven't been rebuilt. And Gaza is not a warm place. It's not Winnipeg, but it's pretty cold in the winter in Gaza, and you have 18,000 families with no shelter whatsoever. Then we get into the act if we can. I mean, she called us frantically. Some of us happen to be nearby. And so as Israeli activists, we come to try to resist the demolition of Palestinian homes. We chain ourselves in the home. We get on the roof sometimes. Or we get in front of bulldozers, which is why I'm built this way. Bulldozers got to think twice, man. And we resist the demolition of homes. We're calling activists, we're calling journalists, we're calling diplomats to, because we've lost this house. It's gone. But if we start to make a commotion, there begins to be a tension, the Israeli army that came to demolish 10 homes will retreat. And maybe we could save 3, 4, or 5 homes that day if we can mobilize our people and the press and the diplomats. Finally, we're out of the house and the family's out of the house. So the civil administration simply subcontracts to commercial wrecking companies or construction companies. If you own a little company, you own a little bulldozer, you can apply for a contract to demolish Palestinian homes. So that Rami says to the contractor, throw everything out. You got 5 minutes, whatever you can throw out, throw out. And you can see how everything's ripped out. Imagine in your home, you know, things are attached to the wall. You have bedroom sets. Everything is ripped out. Your papers are flying. Your kids' toys are, you know, it's humiliating. It's a sense of invasion. And of course, you're financially ruined as well. And then the bulldozer comes to demolish the home. Comes through the wall Salim built, through the garden that he planted, and begins to demolish. And here there's a tragedy and a tragedy. The driver of the bulldozer is a Palestinian. Just happens to be a guy that works for this company. Can't say no and lose his job. And he was a friend of Salim's. So they knew, you can imagine what's going through his mind as he's demolishing his friend's home. Salim is lying on the ground watching. And one reason why this is such a powerful advocacy tool for us, house demolitions, is that it completely counters the Israeli framing. Israel will make you believe, and it's succeeded with governments and press and a lot of public opinion, that everything it does is for security. Israel's defending itself against terrorism. That's what you hear all the time. And so if you go out in the street and ask anybody, why is Israel demolishing Palestinian homes? I mean, people don't know. But if you think about it for a minute, there's only one reason that you can think of that Israel leaves you with, and that is, well, these must be homes of terrorists. Right? Why else would Israel do it? It's the only democracy in the Middle East, But it's not true. Of the 48,000 homes demolished, less than 1% had anything to do with security. And you can see there's nothing. If Salim was a terrorist or had done something criminal, he wouldn't be lying on the ground. He'd be in jail. They didn't come to arrest him or charge him. So he's watching his home be demolished, and the home is gone. So what we decided to do as Israeli activists is to rebuild homes, Palestinian homes that have been demolished, as political acts of resistance, not humanitarian. This isn't good Israelis helping their poor Palestinian victims. That would never go. But rather, joint resistance of Israelis and Palestinians together. We've built 187 homes over the last 14, 15 years. If it was humanitarian, it would be meaningless. What's 187 out of 48,000? But if you think of it as 187 joint acts of resistance of Israelis and Palestinians, that means something. And I have to say, this is a home that's been demolished 6 times, but that's not always the case. It's because Salim has been very upfront. He speaks out. He works with diplomats, so he's targeted. Of the 187 homes, knock on wood, 175 are still standing. I mean, a demolition order is like a diamond. It's forever. So they can be demolished tomorrow morning. But in other words, it isn't simply a symbolic act that you always say, but where families are targeted and re-demolished, we stay with those families and rebuild the homes. And it's not only Israelis and Palestinians. You see these people with red baseball caps. They're what are called the Christian peacemaker teams. Many of them are Canadians, Mennonites, Church of the Brethren, Quakers, and other Christian denominations that come to Palestine, mainly to Hebron, where they kind of stand between the soldiers and the settlers and the Palestinians, but come to work with us as well. In our lingo, you're all known as internationals to come and build with Palestinians and Israelis. We work through Palestinian organizations like the Land Defense Committee, and building homes is genuinely a peacemaking effort. It takes us 2 weeks or more to build a home. We're eating together. This is maklube, which is the Palestinian national dish. And we're building together. Here's Arabia between 2 Israeli women building her home, rebuilding her home. Arabia, who's traumatized, scared, intimidated, the only Israelis she's ever met in her life are soldiers. So here come Israeli women activists to build a house with her. In other words, it's not only an act of political solidarity with Arabia, but personal solidarity. You know, coming and being there and building together. You know what it takes for a woman who's so traumatized to smile? So it really shows in some ways how meaningful the rebuilding is. And we begin to get the house up. Now you get a good look at the agricultural land that we're talking about. Salim says it hasn't been farmed since Adam. And we got the house up. You can see the scaffolding, kind of. And we had just poured the roof, the cement roof, the night before. And I had a feeling they're going to come back. So we slept over that night. Sure enough, at 4:30 in the morning, the soldiers come back. Micha comes back, the bulldozers, and the house is fresh concrete, so it's not hard to just knock it over. And the home is demolished again. So Salim's face kind of says it all. And this is even the coffee that we didn't get a chance to drink yet in the morning, and the house was gone. So we decided we're going to rebuild again. This is the political logic. You know, if they demolish 100 times, we're going to rebuild it 101 times. We're not going to let the occupation win. So we go back to build the home again. Now, this is all taking time. You know, we have to raise money. It's not so cheap to build houses. We have to give the family sometimes, if it takes tremendous courage on the part of these families to do this. You're defying the Israeli army. That's a pretty scary thing. You can be fined. You can be arrested. Your family goes through the trauma again. Not every family wants to rebuild. So we have to be sure the family understands, the family is ready. So it takes, you know, the family sometimes takes its time to decide. So it takes time, but we finally got another house up for Salim and Arabia. You can see they moved in. And the next day, the civil administration came back again to demolish the home. And the same thing repeats itself. Micha, foreign workers coming in and removing the furniture, and a caterpillar, and that's why we're doing a BDS campaign about Caterpillar, boycotts, divestment, sanctions. We're asking universities, churches, other institutions to divest their stocks from Caterpillar, which is a very good investment, but that builds bulldozers specifically for demolishing Palestinian homes as military equipment. In this case, they brought a pneumatic drill in order to dig up the foundations so that we couldn't rebuild the home. And again, the house is gone. Salim says, the demolition of a home is really the demolition of a family. You know, human beings can't live without homes. But men, women, and children react very differently. For men, it's very emasculating. You can imagine, you're humiliated in front of your children, which is hard in any culture. You can't protect your family. You can't provide shelter for your family. But men at least get out of the house. You know, they're working, they're out in society. They can vent to some degree, get the anger out. For women, it's a double tragedy. Most Palestinian women don't work outside of the home. So the domestic sphere defines them as people, as women, as wives, as mothers. So when a woman loses her home, she becomes kind of disoriented. I mean, not only the practical things, how do I feed my family tonight? But, you know, my life is in shambles. I don't know, you know, where to begin to fulfill my family duties. And women often withdraw into a kind of a mourning, like you can see with Arabia. But then you have to move into the home of another woman. In other words, you can't live in a tent forever. So you have to move in with either your husband's parents' family or one of your husband's brother's family. Now you're moving in with 7 kids. And it's not for the weekend. You're moving in. They've got 5, 6, 7, 8 kids. They're living in inadequate conditions. They can't get decent housing either. Now you've got 15, 20 people all crowded into a small house. So you can imagine the domestic tensions between the families that this causes. You know, with all the love and solidarity, it's not an easy situation. And Arabia is after Salim. You have to get me out. You have to give me my space. Salim doesn't have the money to rent a place. He can't build on his own land. He's frustrated. So really, a house demolition is, in a sense, the demolition of a family. And then the kids. You know, kids go home after school. Kids go home from college breaks. I mean, home. Well, this is Lena, one of Salim and Arabia's daughters, who went blind during one of the demolitions. In other words, in the middle of the demolition, all of a sudden she couldn't see. So we put her in the car, we rushed her to the hospital, and in the emergency ward, when the doctor was coming and she was calming down a bit, her sight began to come back. And the doctor explained it's a kind of hysterical blindness. In other words, when your mind just can't process what's going on, it shuts down. So you can imagine the depth of trauma that these kids are living. And the house was demolished and rebuilt and demolished and rebuilt. In one of the rebuildings, we put up, that lasted a few years, we put up a mural of a dead Caterpillar bulldozer on a pile of dead armaments. These are actually, it's hard to see, but these are actually Palestinian, Israeli, and international workers marching together, working together in solidarity. And hovering over the scene are the forms of 2 women who died in demolitions. A woman named Nuha Swaidan, the pregnant mother of 10 children, died in her bed at night when the Israeli army bulldozed their home on top of the family. So the forms of these 2 women hovered over the scene. Last year, Salim and Arabia's home was demolished twice. Once in January, we rebuilt it in the summer, and then again last November. In the middle of the night this time, the family was rousted from its bed, and this is November and January. This is the middle of the winter. It's the mountains. It's cold. It's rainy. The whole family is thrown out of their beds at night, and all their belongings thrown out. This is a Bedouin encampment up here. 8 Bedouin homes were demolished that night as well. Arabia with all her stuff, and Salim and Arabia in the demolition of their home. So just to end this, I want to say that in terms of resolving this conflict, that I think is urgent on a global scale, not simply locally, we've never been opposed to the two-state solution. If the Palestinians accept it, that's fine with me. But I would argue, as I have today, that it's gone. It's irrelevant. It's buried under the settlements, under the facts on the ground. The fragmentation. There's no way a Palestinian state is going to emerge. You're not going to push Israel out of the occupied territory. And even if you wanted to, the Canadian government would oppose it. Not to mention the American government. So Israel doesn't have to worry about international pressures. So the two-state solution is gone, which means then that Israel has, like I said, made this one country. There is one country here, and it's an apartheid country. It's Israel over a Palestinian, what the South Africans used to call in the apartheid days, a Bantustan. Little islands of areas A and B, the Cantons and Gaza, without Jerusalem, without borders, without resources, without an economy, basically imprisoned in a Bantustan. That one state, Israel thinks it can maintain this. Israel thinks we've won. It's over. We're mopping up. This week, 50 homes have been demolished. Just this week. This week, your government signed a memorandum of understanding with Israel that says it's going to be illegal to delegitimize Israel. What I'm doing now, by criticizing my own country and its policies and defending the Palestinians, is considered by your government to be the delegitimization of Israel, and it'll be illegal to do. So you have now legislation going through your parliament that completely compromises your freedom of speech. You won't be able to advocate for a BDS you have BDS with SodaStream, there's BDS campaigns about Caterpillar. You won't be able to do that. It'll be illegal. So that shows how this is seeping into your own society. But we have to say that apartheid is not acceptable to us. It is not legitimate. You can't force us by law and threats to legitimize an apartheid regime. So it seems to me there's only one way out. And that is to say to Israel, okay, you created one state. You destroyed the two-state solution. Now we have to transform that one apartheid state into a democratic state of equal rights for all its citizens. So that's the solution. It's not even on the agenda. As a matter of fact, your government would consider it illegal for me to even suggest such an idea because it wouldn't be Israel anymore. Just saying, my last word is that this is all unsustainable. It can't go on forever. And I think that it's going to collapse. And when the collapse happens, which could be soon, then the one-state solution, I think, will become relevant.